Well, thank you all so much, and I'm really excited to be here on such a great occasion. Happy birthday to Peter, and Peter, I know you like free will, so for your birthday, I got you the possibility that we might have free will. So it's a bit of a modest gift. Okay, so background here, Peter has, in other work, pioneered an argument that is supposed to show that not only should we be worried about having free will, the possibility that we have free will if determinism is true, we should also worry that we don't have free will if indeterminism is true. This argument is called the rollback argument. And I've elsewhere argued that we can respond to this argument by claiming that free actions lack objective probabilities. So what I want to do today, so that I think responds to that particular argument, but it brings up some problems of its own, particularly in how we think about think about ordinary acts. So some like points in action theory about what it's like to act might cause problems for this view. So what I want to do today is raise a bunch of objections to this view and try to defend them, try to defend the view against the objections. Okay, so just going to give you some background on the rollback argument, my response to it, the objections, and my defense. Okay, so the libertarian worries that, or thinks that free will is incompatible with determinism, but that nonetheless we have free will. Peter has claimed that, in fact, free will is incompatible with indeterminism as well. So worry free will remains a mystery because it's incompatible with both determinism and indeterminism. Call chance incompatibilism the thesis that if the state of the world at time t1 in conjunction with the laws of physics entails that an act will occur at time t2, thank you very much, with some definite objective probability, then the act is not free at time t2. So Peter has argued for the following two claims. All acts have some definite objective probability, and therefore, because of chance incompatibilism, no act is free. And here's the argument purporting to show this. So this is Peter from his paper, Free Will Remains a Mystery. Consider an agent, Alice, who is deciding whether to lie. Let us assume her choice is undetermined by the state of the world at t1 and the laws of physics. And let's say she lies at t2. What would have to be true if, hypothetically, God were to reset the universe to t1 and let events transpire as they may? And if God were to do this many times over? Since Alice's lying isn't determined, it would have to be the case that sometimes she tells the truth and sometimes she tells a lie. Now, if God were to replay the event enough times, the proportion of replays in which Alice lies to replays in which she tells the truth are going to converge to some definite number. For example, maybe after 100 replays, she's lied 35 times. After 1,000, she's lied 326 times, et cetera, so that after a very, very large number of replays, she's lied 30% of the time. We would be then confident that the proportion of lies to total cases would settle out to 0.3. And then this is the key quote on your handout. But to say that she lies in 30% of the cases is just to say that there is a 30% chance of her lying in any particular case, including some hypothetical next case, and including, indeed, the actual case at hand. Furthermore, if there is a definite objective probability to her lying, then whether she lies in the case at hand is a mere matter of chance. It is as if whether she lies is determined by the flip of a biased coin, which has a 30% chance of landing heads. Okay, so again, the worry here is if we were to replay this over and over, even if indeterminism is true, we'd have some definite proportion of cases in which she lies, but then there's no sort of important difference between her flipping a coin and deciding whether to lie and what she actually does. We don't think that actions on the basis of coin flips are free, therefore we shouldn't think that Alice is free. Okay, so unlike a lot of people in this debate, I agree with Peter that if an act has a definite objective probability at a time, then it cannot be a free act at that time. And I think Peter does a great job of bringing out why. If making some decision is just like flipping a coin, then it doesn't really come from me, so to speak. So it's not an instance of my freedom. However, I've challenged the idea that this scenario implies that there is a definite objective probability of Alice lying. And the key point is that we actually have no reason, just from the setup of the scenario, to think that the proportion of replays will converge. So why might we think that it converges, or what's the argument according to Peter's paper that it converges? Well, it's something like the law of large numbers. And the law of large numbers says roughly this: in repeated independent trials with the same probability P of success in each trial, the percentage of successes is increasingly likely to be close to the chance of success as the number of trials increases. So what the law of large numbers says is that if there's an objective probability, then we will converge to it. However, what that means is that the law of large numbers can't be used to show that lies to total cases converges in this case. In fact, there's nothing in this setup to guarantee or even provide a reason to think that before Alice lies, there is an objective probability of her lying. So of course it's possible that the scenario will unfold as described, that in roughly 30% of the cases at each time, at each number of replays, she will have lied. But it's also perfectly possible that she'll lie, in the first 100 cases, she'll lie 30% of the time. In the next 1,000, she'll lie 90% of the time, and so forth, such that it never converges. And if that's right, then Alice lying is not like the flip of a coin. It's not dependent on objective probabilities. So what this does is this opens up an interesting new possibility in the free will debate. We might call this chance libertarian free will. What this view says is that before a person exercises her will, each of the acts open to her does not have a definite objective chance of occurring. Now, one way to be a chance libertarian, and this was sort of like the target of Peter's original paper, is to say that, is to accept a view called agent causation. So it's like acts that are caused by the agent are sort of importantly different in some way from acts that are just caused by some other event, or sorry, events caused by an agent are different from events caused by other events. So that's one way of saying that free acts lack objective probability, is to say that agent-caused acts lack objective probability. But there might be other views according to which we can say that free acts don't have objective probability. Okay, so I briefly addressed in this other paper, is it consistent with current physics to say that free acts lacked objective probability? Doesn't physics just like assign objective probability to all events? Actually, there's at least a good case to be made that physics does not assign objective probabilities to all events. We can think of this in one of two ways. One way to think about it is that, at least according to some people, what quantum mechanics primarily tells us about is objective conditional probabilities. And conditional probabilities shouldn't worry us unless we think the antecedent of the conditional also has some chance of occurring. Another way to think about this is maybe like a little more radical, is to think that the kinds of things that physics studies are merely the kinds of things that physics studies. So, for example, if you think that agent causation is a real thing, if you think that people can cause things, there isn't like a lab where we sort of go and figure out the probabilities of people causing things. So you might sort of just think, and this is again a more radical view, that events that involve agents are just sort of like different from the events that physics has studied, namely the events that don't involve agents. Okay, I'm not going to talk today about sort of physics points. Those of you in the audience who know the physics much better than I do are free to debate about it, and it'd be interesting to hear more about it. But what I want to talk about today is some worries from action theory. So some worries about the idea that, that we just don't assign objective probabilities to events, or to agent acts. These worries are all going to be sort of like of the form, look, all these ways we have of thinking about what it is to be an agent require assigning objective probabilities to acts. And we lose these if we adopt my view. And I'm going to argue, in fact, none of these ways are best cashed out in terms of assigning objective probabilities to agent acts. And as we talk about this, two important points, we're going to need to keep two important points in mind. We sort of learned from the rollback argument and my response to it. First, the claim that we can assign definite conditional probability to an action doesn't threaten chance libertarian freedom if the antecedent describes a free act, because merely having a conditional probability doesn't tell you that the conditional itself has the thing that is the claim that is the conditional has a probability, unless we also know that the antecedent has an objective probability. Okay, so for example, let's say I'm playing basketball, and let's say generously to me that the probability that I score a goal conditional on my shooting the ball is 0.6. The fact that I can assign a probability here doesn't mean I'm not free with respect to choosing to score. It doesn't mean that if the ball goes in the basket, I didn't score the goal freely or of my own will or something like that. It just means that my will operates in the choice of whether to shoot, not whether given that I've shot to score. And sort of like a limit case of this is that you might think if we were all perfectly in control of ourselves, then we could assign probability of A, given that I choose to A, as 1. But this clearly doesn't threaten my freedom at all, because I choose to A is just a description of doing something freely. Okay, so that's the first important point to keep in mind. Objective conditional chances don't necessarily threaten us. The second point to keep in mind is that actually the claim that Alice has an objective chance of lying doesn't just require that the rollbacks converge. It also requires that they're random in a suitable way. For example, let's say the rollback sequence is she tells the truth the first time, she lies the second time, she tells the truth, she lies, she tells the truth, she lies, she tells the truth, she lies. This converges to 50% of the time she tells the truth, but it is not very plausibly generated by chance, right? Like, I mean, it might be that's a possible sequence that chance should generate, but if we saw that sequence, we shouldn't think, oh, she has a 50% chance of lying. So to say that something has a chance is actually much stronger than saying that a portion of, that the sequence involving it converges. It's to say something specific about the way in which, the way the trials look. So there are many definitions of what it is to be a random sequence, but the basic idea is something like knowing the prior members of the sequence don't give you any more information about the next member, whereas in the sequence I presented to you, like, you absolutely can predict the next member of the sequence. Okay. So now on to the objections. The first two of these are found in print. The other two I think of as sort of like the strongest worries about this view. So I'm going to mention them all and then I'll respond to them. Okay. First objection comes from the, so, again, all these objections are sort of the form, don't some natural claims about agency imply that actions do have objective probabilities, even if they're free, or maybe especially if they're free actions. Okay, so the first objection comes from the idea of thinking about what it is to act on reasons. So it's natural to think that if I have a reason to do something, then that reason raises the objective probability that I'll do it. So, you know, if Alice has a reason to lie, maybe there's lots of personal gain at stake, then that raises the objective probability that she'll lie. But of course, it can't raise the objective probability that she'll lie unless her lying has some objective probability. So if we accept this picture of reasons, then actions are going to have objective probability. And I have a quote here from Marcus Schlosser, who says, "It's very difficult to see how one could construe the metaphysics of the influence of reasons over underdetermined alternatives without the ascription of objective probabilities. Consider the following variant of the Alice scenario. Suppose that Alice judges that the reasons for truth-telling greatly outweigh the normative strength of the reasons for telling a lie, and suppose that she judges, therefore, that she should tell the truth. If Alice is rational on this occasion, then the causal influence of her reasons mirrors their normative strength, such that the causal influence of her reasons for truth-telling is significantly stronger than the causal influence of her reasons for lying. Given that her choice is causally undetermined, her reasons for truth-telling do not determine her choice. Rather, they raise the objective probability of her choosing to tell the truth to a significantly higher degree than her reasons for lying raise the objective probability of her choosing to tell a lie." Okay, so that's the first worry, that thinking about what it is to have a reason for acting in a certain way requires assigning objective probabilities to actions. Second objection, sort of similar. Here's something that raises the probability of my lying: my character. So my character determines how likely I am to do something, and we might say like undergoing some character building exercises will raise the probability that I do the right thing. But of course, this can't be true unless there is a probability that I lie in the first place. Peter Furlong makes the point as follows: if Alice is a very honest person, then we should expect to see a majority of replays in which she tells the truth. How can one admit that the agent's character grounds this tendency while denying that it grounds probabilities? So for example, if we have like honest Alice undergoes the rollback argument, we would expect that she tells the truth in like 80 out of 100 of the replays. And if dishonest Alice undergoes the experiment, we should expect her to tell the truth in 20 out of 100 replays. And it seems like we don't have a good way to say what it is to be honest or dishonest without invoking objective probabilities. Okay? Third objection. It seems like we naturally ascribe probabilities to others' actions. So for example, if I ask Dean to borrow $5, he'll probably say yes. Alice is more likely to lie than Bob. 4 out of 5 dentists recommend Colgate, so my dentist has an 80% chance of recommending Colgate. These are all statements we make. They seem like correct. It seems like we have reasons for thinking them. But it's not just that we're like able to make these statements. We also act on them, and we think that we're rational in doing so. So for example, if I ask Dean to borrow $5, he'll probably say yes. So I'll just order my lunch, assuming Dean has it covered. Alice is more likely to lie than Bob, so I'm going to ask Bob to tell me what happened rather than Alice. So we can sort of think of this in general as like I make bets on what other people will do. Bets are like good bets to make or rational bets to make insofar as probabilities are a certain way. But if we don't have probabilities, it seems like we can't see these things. Okay, so those are the 4 objections. Now I will proceed to answer them. And as I do, we're going to learn some things about the relationship of sort of agency, action, probability, and free will. Okay, so let's start with the objection that if my reasons tell in favor of doing something, what they do is they raise the objective probability that I will do it. So what a lot of people that make this kind of argument seem to assume is that we have various competing reasons to do something, and then we decide. So like Alice has a reason, this self-interested reason. It's like this strong. Then Alice has this other reason, namely she like cares about honesty. It's this strong. Those reasons compete, And what we're left with is like a certain strength of reason, maybe it's 0.8. So then I decide, and what my decision should sort of like be naturally thought of is as having a 0.8 probability of lying. I'm like, or telling the truth. So I'm like more swayed towards telling the truth, but I might not. Okay. I actually think this is the wrong picture of what it is to act on reasons. In fact, agency, or exercising free will, consists in deciding what counts as a reason for you, or deciding how your reasons weigh against each other. So it's not that self-interest points in this direction this strongly, and desire to tell the truth points in this other direction this strongly. Instead, Alice decides, do I care about self-interest? And if so, how much? Do I care about being an honest person? And if so, how much? And how do these two things weigh against each other for me? Or another way to put this point, by choosing one thing rather than another, Alice decides how her reasons weigh against each other and what she has the strongest reasons to do. She endorses some reasons over others. So it's not that reasons are given from the outside and then we decide to act. It's that what it is to act is to, and what it is to act freely, is to decide that your reasons weigh in a certain way. It's to like pick what it is that's the strongest reason for you to act. Okay. So this gives us a reply to both objection 1 and objection 2. So in response to objection 1, we can grant that the probability that Alice tells the truth, given that her reasons weigh in favor of telling the truth, is much higher than the probability that Alice tells the truth, given that her reasons weigh against telling the truth. And we can grant that, therefore, these conditional probabilities have value, but the antecedents just describe what it is to act freely. So these conditionals are like the conditional, I'll make a basket, given that I shoot the ball, where the shooting the ball part is up to me, and in fact, is what it is to act freely. Okay, so the second worry was about character. So this is the worry that my character determines how likely I am to do something. Again, it seems like dishonest Alice is less likely to lie than honest Alice. So there are sort of two things we can say in response here. I'll mention the first one, but I actually think the second is more interesting. First, we could just say that, similar to my reply to objection 1, that Alice's character is just a description of how she in fact weighs various types of reasons. Dishonest Alice is just a person who in fact counts the self-interested reasons more highly than the non-self-interested reasons, and vice versa for honest Alice. And again, how she weighs reasons is up to her. And then we just sort of add, well, it turns out that how she weighs them is somewhat stable over time. And in general, how people weigh reasons against each other is somewhat stable over time. That's why we can talk about character as like a stable disposition of a person. So the upshot of this reply would again be that the probability that Alice is lying, given that she's not an honest person, is higher than the probability that she's going to lie, given that she is an honest person. But again, the antecedent here is just going to describe an exercise of free will. It describes what Alice does in making a choice. She weighs her reasons and thus is like describable as an honest or dishonest person. Okay, so that's one type of reply. I think there's some plausibility. So if how you weigh reasons is somewhat stable over time, then this kind of reply might imply that each particular decision isn't up to you in some sense. So it's not like each time I make a choice, I like think to myself, personal integrity or self-interest, and like make the choice anew. It might be sort of a more automatic process, which might locate free will sort of like not in each choice, but like whenever I kind of think to myself, how are my reasons going to weigh for like until I rethink this? And I think there's some plausibility to this idea, but I actually think there's a better reply, and that's the following. To say that honest Alice will lie less often than dishonest Alice doesn't imply that her lying has lower objective probability. So consider the case of an actual agent over time. Let's say we have Alice who lies a lot, and Alice is asked to answer questions a lot of the time. So it turns out Alice has lied 75% of the time when her personal gain was at stake. She was asked 100 questions, 75 of them she lied. She wants to change, though, so she undergoes a character development regimen. After this regimen, she lies a lot less. In fact, the next 100 times her personal gain is at stake, she only lied 10 of them. Okay, what should we say about this? In this case, has Alice decreased the objective probability of lying? No, she hasn't. She's only decreased the objective probability of her lying if her lies form a suitably random sequence. That is, if they don't have a discernible pattern. Recall that lie, truth, lie, truth, lie, truth, lie, truth wasn't generated by objective probability. But this isn't what we generally think happens when somebody is lying or telling the truth. It's not anyone's guess whether Alice will lie, so to speak. If you know Alice really well, you might have a better sense of which question she's going to tell the truth to and which question she's going to lie to. And very importantly, it seems like for each instance of her being asked a question, you can gather more evidence about what she'll do. What kind of question is this? Like, what kind of mood is Alice in today? And so forth. So you could actually become a pretty good predictor about how Alice will choose, even if it's the case that, like, in the 10 out of 100 cases, she's lied. And to see that this improvement in her behavior doesn't imply that her actions have objective probabilities, let's compare this Alice story to a story involving actions that are intentionally random. So this is something that it's sometimes a good idea to do in games of chance against another person, to randomize your actions. So for example, take the game rock, paper, scissors. Here's how I play rock, paper, scissors. I use a random number generator to determine each of my moves. The result is that I play rock exactly a third of the time. If I decided to use a different random number generator, I could play it exactly 1/5 of the time. When I'm using this random number generator, there's a 1/3 objective chance of my throwing rock. Furthermore, there's no evidence you can get that will make you a better predictor of what I'll do. That's like precisely why it's a good strategy, because you can't figure out what I'm going to do. By contrast, if we say something like, Alice has lied 30% of the time, this might initially make us think, okay, I think, in a third of the cases she's going to lie, but I could get more evidence about each particular case, which is to imply that her actions aren't governed by objective chance, 30% lying. They're governed by something else. They're governed by her own choices. So again, to say that something is governed by objective probability is actually really strong. It has strong implications about repeated behavior, and by implication, it has strong implications about hypothetical behavior like rollbacks. So again, to say that someone will do something more often is actually not the same as saying they have a higher chance of doing that thing. There's room in between doing something more often and having a higher chance of that thing, because they just might not have any chance whatsoever of doing that thing, in the sense that they lack a chance of doing that thing. Okay. So next, let's talk about the two objections about how I think about other people's acts. So it seems like I can say Dean is likely to lend me $5, Alice is more likely to lie than Bob, and I can act on those things. How is that possible if it's just sort of like genuinely open, Dean could lend me the money or not, and we can't like assign numbers to these possibilities. We can't assign objective probabilities to these possibilities. Well, I think the answer here is that the probabilities in these statements and the probabilities that rationalize my bets are subjective probabilities. So I'm going to explain the difference between subjective and objective probabilities, but obviously it's not going to be enough to just say that they're subjective probabilities. I have to say that they're subjective probabilities and then show that subjective probabilities don't sort of like give rise to the worrying rollback scenario. Okay, so subjective probabilities correspond to my degrees of belief, and they say something about the evidence I have, whereas objective probability corresponds to some chance fact in the world. So here's sort of like a way to think about what these things commit you to. First of all, so to say that Alice lies is to rule out worlds in which she tells the truth. So I'm saying something about the world, namely all the possibilities in which she tells the truth, we're not in one of those. To say that there is a 0.3 objective probability that she lies is also to rule out certain kinds of worlds. It's to rule out worlds in which she has a different probability of lying. So to say that there's a 0.3 chance that she'll lie, that's compatible both with her lying and her telling the truth, but it's incompatible with like there being a 0.6 chance that she'll lie. So I am saying some fact about the world. On the other hand, when I say that there is a 0.3 subjective probability that she lies, I'm not ruling out any worlds at all. I'm not ruling out worlds in which Alice lies. I'm not ruling out worlds in which Alice tells the truth. I'm also not ruling out worlds in which there's some objective probability of her lying or telling the truth. I'm saying nothing whatsoever about the world we're in. I'm saying something about my evidence. I'm saying my evidence means that it's rational to assign 0.3 probability, 0.3 subjective probability, or to have a degree of belief 0.3 that she will lie. So what subjective probability does is it reflects the balance of the evidence. I'm going to say a little more about evidence in a minute because this might give rise to a different worry about free will, namely like how do I get evidence about what you're going to do if there aren't any objective probabilities. And again, to say that the subjective probability that Alice lies is 0.3 says nothing about the existence of objective probabilities. Here's how the sort of like logical relationships work. If there are objective probabilities, that could fix or determine an event, but subjective probabilities are themselves determined by the event via evidence. Okay, and one way to like sort of notice the difference between objective and subjective probabilities, and also to like confirm that the statements that I make about other people's actions are in fact subjective probabilities, is to notice how these two things change when the event is in the future as opposed to the past. So normally the objective probability that an event will happen is different from the objective probability that it did happen. So stuff happened, objective probabilities 0 or 1. I flipped a coin, it's something, it's either probability heads 1 or probability heads 0. I'm about to flip a coin, probability heads 0.5. So normally sort of going through time changes the objective probabilities. However, when it comes to subjective probabilities, the subjective probability that an event will happen doesn't need to be different from the subjective probability that it did happen if your evidence is different. For example, I know that someone else asked Dean to borrow $5. I don't know what he said, but I can say it's pretty likely Dean said yes. Probability 0.8 that Dean said yes. That's not something I would say if I was talking about objective probabilities. If I'm talking about objective probabilities, then it's either 0 or 1. Okay. And sort of as like a, another pointer that subjective probabilities are about your evidence. The reasons I have for assigning 0.8 to Dean loaning my friend $5 are the same reasons that I have for assigning 0.8 to Dean will loan me $5. They're namely just sort of like things I know about Dean. So it's sort of the evidence about what Dean did do or will do in each case is the same. Okay. So this gives us an easy way to reply to the third objection. We just note that the probability ascriptions are subjective, and subjective probabilities don't imply objective probabilities. Subjective probabilities are downstream from objective probabilities. But this gives rise to a different kind of worry. You might think that assigning subjective probability 0.3 to Alice telling the truth, while this isn't an objective probability, it might imply that rollbacks will exhibit the problematic pattern. So like if I assign probability 0.3 to Alice lying, what should I think the rollbacks look like? Worry, I should think that, 0.3 of the time, or sorry, 30% of the time she'll lie, and moreover, this will be true after 100 replays, it'll be true after 1,000 replays, it'll be true after 1,000,000 replays, and the sequence should look like somewhat random to me. However, this misunderstands what it is that subjective probabilities imply. So to assign subjective probability that Alice lies as 0.3 implies the following two things. It implies something like 30% of the hypothetical time that you have evidence E about a subject, that subject is going to do A. So like whatever evidence I have about Alice, 30% of the time when that evidence appears, the person lies. Or another way to put this, there are 100 cases in which I have the exact same evidence about the subject as I do about Alice in this case, then 30-ish of these cases are ones in which the subject tells the truth. Subjective probability 0.3 does not imply that you have the following evidence. 30% of the hypothetical time you consider a subject, that subject does A. So it doesn't have the following implication. In 100 cases of rolled back Alice, she lies in 30-ish of them. My subjective probability 0.3 that she lies is actually compatible, it's like fully compatible with determinism. So I could think subjective probability that Alice will lie 0.3, even if I think we're in a deterministic universe and she will either lie or not every time the universe is rolled back, just as I could have subjective probability 0.3 that she did lie when that thing is already in the past, and for the same reasons. Okay. So this point about the relationship between objective and subjective probabilities also helps us reply to objection 4. That was the objection that seems like I can rationally bet on other people's free actions. How could that be true unless I could assign some probability to them? Okay. Unless I could assign some probability to them. So, okay, I've replied and said bets are based on subjective probability. We're only using subjective probability. That doesn't imply objective probability. But the worry here is that even if we say that we're talking about subjective probabilities, betting using them only makes sense if in the hypothetical long run, Alice will tell the truth 30% of the time. So you can sort of like ask the question, what is it that licenses betting 30 cents on Alice telling the truth? it seems like the only thing that could license this is the following fact. If I were to repeat the same scenario over and over, her line would converge 40% of the time. Because otherwise, like, I'm going to lose the bet. I'm going to lose money over time. Similarly, what licenses my betting more on Bob telling the truth than Alice telling the truth? Seems like it's got to be, if we replayed the scenario over and over, Bob would tell the truth more than Alice. So like in the sort of hypothetical cases, Bob's telling the truth more times than Alice is telling the truth. And even if I tell you, well, that's about subjective probabilities, not objective probabilities, worry, this exhibits the problematic pattern that implies that the actions weren't themselves due to me. They were sort of a matter of chance. Sort of some of the time I lie, some of the time I tell the truth. It's just like flipping a coin. Okay. So this objection also misunderstands the relationship between subjective probability and how well I'll do in the long run by taking a bet. So in particular, when I assign subjective probability 0.3 to an action, what I'm saying is, if I were to face an action that in fact will happen 30% of the time, then I will do better by making this bet than by making this other bet. So what I'm saying is, if I assign a certain, what I'm saying by assigning a certain probability is I'm treating this action like the following hypothetical scenario. In the hypothetical scenario, it's good to bet 30 cents. I'll do better over the long run by betting 30 cents. Or it's better to bet on Bob than Alice. But importantly, I'm the one sort of constructing the hypothetical scenario. I'm not saying that when I assign probability 0.3, I'm not saying that we are in a scenario in which things will happen this way over the long run. So in other words, just like subjective probabilities are downstream from objective probabilities, bets are downstream from subjective probabilities. It's not that how I will do over the long run is what makes it the case that I should bet in a certain way, and therefore assign probability in a certain way. It's that if I assign probability in a certain way, that makes it the case that I should take certain bets because I'm behaving as if I'm projecting the long run in this way. So maybe a similar example is like, say I'm like betting on the existence of God. That's like an event we all agree like happened or is true or false. To assign probability 0.5 and therefore like take certain bets on that event isn't to say that like hypothetically I think God exists half of the time. It's to say the rational way to bet in this scenario is the same as I ought to bet in the scenario in which I assign, in which there is an event that genuinely happens half of the time. Okay. I sense that wasn't perfectly clear, so happy to talk about that more. Okay, final worry. I've said that subjective probability is like a response to the evidence that I have about whether someone's going to lie or tell the truth. Worry isn't my ability to get evidence about what you will do incompatible with free will. So if you think of there's like a genuinely open future, it could go this way or that way. How can I get evidence about what will in fact happen? And the reply here is just that even if you could go one way or another, you could do A or B, I can get evidence about what you will do, even if you could go either way. So there's still possible futures in which you tell the truth and possible futures in which you lie. Your will, like how you, especially if we think about it in terms of how you weigh reasons, is not some spooky thing that like I have no access to. How you tend to weigh reasons, how whether you think self-interest is better than honesty is not like some fact about you that I have no access to. Now, it's true that I have to think of you as still being able to do one thing or the other. But that doesn't imply that I can't get any evidence about what you'll do. Again, just how I can get evidence about how you acted in the past. I can get evidence about how you will act in the future. It's the exact same evidence. And notice also that people who think the probabilistic story about the past and the future is different, for example, the past is fixed and the future is probabilistic, will say the same thing, that I can have evidence about how you acted and evidence about how you will act. And it's the same evidence, even though the objective probabilities are different. So this should show you that whatever evidence I'm getting about someone's will, it's not the kind of evidence that determines their actions. Okay, so what I've done is I think that the idea that we don't assign objective probabilities to acts is a very promising alternative in the free will debate. It doesn't fall prey to the rollback argument. It doesn't make our actions look like relevantly like coin flips. I've tried to defend it against 4 objections, and I think in the process we've learned 4 things about free will. First, objective probabilities of acts don't threaten free will. Objective conditional probabilities of acts don't threaten free will if the antecedents are just descriptions of what it is to act freely. Second, that an act happens more often doesn't mean that act happens with higher objective probability. Saying something happens with higher objective probability is like much stronger than saying that that act happens like a certain percentage of the time. Next, objective probabilities determine the act, and subjective probabilities are determined by the act. We ascribe subjective probabilities to other people's actions, which is to say, we're talking about our evidence for what they'll do. We're not talking about some fact or feature of them. And we bet using these probabilities. But this doesn't imply the existence of objective probabilities, and it also doesn't imply the worrying rollback behavior. Furthermore, the kind of evidence we can get about someone else's actions, even if those actions, even if we're in a genuinely indeterminate universe, is just the ordinary kind of evidence that we get about people's past actions. All right, so thanks so much for listening. Happy birthday to Peter, and I look forward to hearing your questions.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Lara. That was really interesting. And I'm a little afraid to say this with Peter in the room, but I'm wondering whether your reply kind of misses the spirit of his objection. And it's an objection I've been kind of sympathetic to, which is that, so with this passage you quote in the beginning, in this passage he's definitely saying, look, if there's a definite objective probability, then it's a mere matter of chance. It's the, like there's a biased coin, et cetera. But I've always kind of thought that the spirit of the worry was that if determinism fails, then nothing is settling what action you take. And that worry isn't addressed by denying that there's an objective probability. So there's a sense in which if everything you say in the talk is true, his worry is even worse, right? Because it's not even a matter of chance. It's hard to put the point clearly, but it's that if it's bad enough if there's just an objective probability of the action. If there isn't even that, it's worse.
Yeah, good. Yeah, thanks for the question. So the specific scenario here, Peter is replying to the person who thinks agent causation could solve the problem. And so agent causation says, like, what caused Alice to lie? Oh, Alice caused it. The end. And so the specific worry here is that agent causation isn't going to help if agent causation is governed, is just governed by the laws of chance. So I'm pretty sympathetic to agent causation, and maybe this just like sounds like a flat-footed response to your question, but so what's making it the case that Alice lies rather than telling the truth? Alice. That's what the person who's a proponent of agent causation is going to say. And then you might say, like, well, okay, but Alice could have told the truth. She could have lied. There's some possibilities in which she tells the truth and which she lies. What explains the fact that she's in this set rather than this set? The proponent of agent causation is just going to say, well, she chooses to locate herself in this set. She could have chosen otherwise. I mean, is that pretty unsatisfying, or? I mean, I think the idea. So I guess I think the idea is just looking at the causal structure of the universe, apart from the fact that there are agents, isn't going to explain what people do. Worry. Well, then there isn't an explanation. But in fact, what I think is this is really good for the idea that agents do things. It's good that the facts of the universe apart from agents don't explain what's going to happen or what happens. Is the facts of the universe plus the facts about agents explain what does happen. So what's doing the work? The agents. Now, what?
I think it's
yeah.
partly a disagreement about where it's okay for explanation to bottom out.
Good. Yeah. So I mean, the main idea, and maybe this is sort of like a more modest point, is like the main idea here is Peter, at least in this paper, is worried that agent causation won't help because something already explains what's happening. It's like chance. Chance explains what Alice is going to do. Reply, no, it doesn't if we deny that there are chances. So there's still room for agency to explain it. Now, how does that work? Well, I'll punt the ball to the metaphysicians. I'm just in the business of telling us when probabilities cause problems and when they don't.
Well, thanks, Lara. Terrific paper. I want to begin by correcting an impression the wrong impression people may have got from the way you phrase things, that I accept the rollback argument. No. I think there's something wrong with it. It's just that I don't know what's wrong with it. Or technically speaking, what you say is wrong with it is wrong with it. But now, when I'm picking up on what Karen was talking about, it'd be, I think, fairly easy to fix it up so that it doesn't depend on that premise. And look at it this way. Suppose somebody wants me to lie on their behalf at noon tomorrow. Maybe I'm going to be asked a question at a press conference, and lie for me. But suppose I know that the process in my mind that goes on that issues in either the lie or the truth at that time has no objective probability of an outcome. Then it seems to me I'm not in a position to promise to lie to the person, just as if you ask me for a ride tomorrow and I know that there's no objective probability as to whether my car will start, I'm not in a position to promise you a ride. Now, it seems to me if I'm able to lie tomorrow, then I am in a position to promise. So if I'm not in a position to promise, then I'm not able. So if there's no objective probability as to whether I'll lie, then I'm not able to lie. And in fact, I'm neither able to lie nor able to tell the truth. So there is where I see the real difficulty.
Great, thanks. Yeah, and I agree with the impression. So we can think of it as the rollback challenge rather than, challenge, explain what's wrong with this argument. And so the worry, let me make sure I understood the worry. The worry is that if I'm not in a position to assign objective probabilities to my promising tomorrow, or sorry, to my lying tomorrow. It seems like I can't promise to lie. And that's because, sorry, I know Dean took the microphone far away, but.
I mean, if there isn't objective, whether I know it or not, if there isn't an objective probability as to how that little deliberation before the action comes, that I'm not in a position, whether I know it or not.
Okay. And why is that the case? Is it because, and yeah, maybe you could say more about why that's the case, that I'm not in the position to promise.
If I don't have $10,000, then I'm not in the position to promise you that I will pay you $10,000, even if I think I have $10,000 and think I'm in a position to pay you.
I see.
So if it's indeterminate and with no probability at all of how it's going to come out, then I'm not in a position. Just as I would, even if I don't know that there's no probabilities whether my car will start when I turn the key tomorrow, I'm not in a position to promise you.
Okay. Good. Yeah. So what I want to say is that even if when things are indeterminate, when it's like there's a genuinely open path, I could do A, I could do B. That doesn't mean I have no information about what will happen. In fact, there's lots of information that isn't probabilistic. That isn't so. Here's some information I have about what will happen. You or I really like to lie. I just like it so much, and I intend to still weigh the reasons as I currently weigh them tomorrow. That doesn't fix it, that there's only one possible thing that I'll do. In fact, it's good that it doesn't fix it, otherwise that wouldn't be a free choice. But it means I can sort of, it means I think I have good evidence that that's what will happen. It's just that having good evidence that something will happen doesn't say anything about the probabilistic facts at all. So yeah, so that's the view. I know, I wish I could take a follow-up, but maybe.
Yeah, I don't want to.
Okay.
Get along.
Okay, well, so yeah, we'll talk about it more. Yeah, so again, like just to sort of reiterate the point, like to say something has objective probability is just say something really strong. What there's like the people that are, so there's like people that are worried about determinism and free will. I'm one of them. There are people that are worried about indeterminism and free will. There are many different types of indeterminism, it turns out. One is one in which we assign objective probabilities, but like there are lots of other types, and we don't sort of like completely lose the structure of what it is to like for people to do things, or we don't lose like guesses or evidence about what it is for people to do things when we say what they do has probability.
So you said that my weighing reasons, so that could not that might not be subject to objective probability. Let's say that. Let's say that we accept agent causation, and my weighing is not subject to objective probability.
Right.
So I'm a whimsical person. I do whatever I have a desire to. But my mental states have an objective probability. So whether or not I have a desire to lie, like whether that desire generates in me has an objective probability. Therefore, I always go with my desire. Therefore, my weighing would have objective probability.
Yeah, great question. Thanks. So you're thinking of a picture in which what I do is I act on my strongest desire, and my desires are given to me sort of from without, so to speak. I'm like a whimsical person. What that just means is like I have a certain kind of mental state where like I see whimsy and like my brain lights up or something like that. Okay, so I disagree with that picture. I think there's like a strong view of desires and a weak view of desires. On the more weak view of desires are just something that like comes to me. Like whimsy, I think yay. That's a weak desire. If we think of desires in that way, then I think I still have a choice about what to do. In fact, that's like just what it is to have free will. Like, I want to steal some stuff. I have a strong desire to do that. Should I do it or not? Like, the answer to that question is like me exercising my free will. It's not just given from the problem what I'll do. I don't think if we interpret desires in this weak sense, then I will just act on the strongest desire. No, I'm a person. That's like what differentiates me from like a billiard ball or something like that. On the other hand, we could interpret desires in a sort of stronger sense, where it's just trivial that I act on my strongest desire. So what it is to like desire to do the whimsical thing is for that to be like ranked first or something. Yeah, that to be the thing that in fact motivates me. If that's the picture, then I would locate the freedom and thus the thing that lacks objective probability in the desires themselves. So in the stronger sense, it's up to me whether to have a desire to be whimsical, or like put another way, whether for that to be the thing on which I'm going to act. So I think, so disagree with that picture. There are two ways of disagreeing with it. They locate free will in a slightly different place, but either way, there's like got to be something that's like up to you in action rather than just given to you from the outside. Thanks.
I was going to make the point about desire, but since I have the microphone and that point has largely been made, I'd like to make another one, and that is to follow up Peter's point. If there's no objective probability of me choosing to do A or B, then it's no more to my credit that I fail to act on what is most probable act, rather than on the less probable act. I mean, if I am, as a result of my upbringing, I have a natural tendency to tell lies and so on, but then and therefore I have an objective probability, let us say, to tell a lie on any given occasion, but I fight this on some occasion and I act contrary to that objective probability. Then my action is more commendable than if I am always than if I act on the stronger objective probability. But if there is no objective probability, I can't see why some actions should be more commendable than other actions of doing what is right.
Great. That's a really great question. Thanks so much, Richard. So I don't think that the fact that my upbringing is one of a certain kind is best cashed out in the idea that I have a high objective probability of lying. Again, think about how strong it is to say that there's an objective probability of something. It's not just to say that, so objective probability 0.9 isn't just to say that I lie 90% of the time, a lot more than someone who has objective probability 0.1. It's also to say that my lies exhibit a pattern that's totally random. And so I want to deny that that's what the kind of upbringing that makes you lie a lot is like. It's not as if it's sort of like, you just don't like instill probabilities into babies or something like that. What that kind of upbringing might do now, and maybe thinking of this picture in terms of desires, it might mean that my desire for personal gain feels very strong to me, or something like that. So on the picture, the first picture where desires are weak things, it might mean that I have that desire very strongly. That when I think about personal gain, I just light up, and it's like hard to fight that. Then what's commendable about my not lying is, despite the fact that like I go, oh, like personal gain, oh, that makes me feel so good. Despite the fact that I feel that way, whereas the person with the good upbringing doesn't experience that desire as strongly, I tell the truth. On the picture on which desires are the thing that you act on most strongly, then what's commendable is, well, I suppose there's still going to have to be an explanation about why I'm more inclined to lie on that picture, and it's still going to, there's still going to be something like weak desire on that picture. It's just going to be called something else. So yeah, so overall, what I'm going to say is like what it means to have an upbringing that makes you more apt to do something. That's to say something about like desires, what's in your head, like what you like, and it's this other fact that like people tend to choose the thing they have the strongest desire. Well, maybe I don't want to say it, but anyway, that's like what it is to have a bad upbringing. But nothing in that picture implies objective probability of lying.
So, thank you. Again, really interesting. So at the beginning you said, oh, look, you know, I'm not going to talk about the physics because, but I'm going to say that it could
I
be
don't
like
know
some,
anything about
no,
physics
I'm not going to ask about the physics. I think it's fair to set that aside. However, because we're talking about agency, I think actually the place to locate that question is at the level of mental events or the mind.
Okay.
And our best science of the mind, like I'm talking artificial intelligence, computation, like the neuroscience, is fundamentally about objective probabilities.
Mm-hmm.
And when we're building things like we're embedding like objective probabilities in there. So one is, I think that's the place where you need to target that issue.
Mm-hmm.
And then second, you could deny that there are any, like that all that engineering, all that computer science is just wrong. But I think that's a pretty high bar to have to meet. So I
Yeah.
just wanted to hear your response to that.
Great, yeah. So I wouldn't deny, and I might have misunderstood the question, so feel free to follow up if I have, or follow up later. So that sounds right about how we build robots. I guess the thing that seems most natural for me to say is that robots built like that don't have free will. They don't have free will because they're unable to like choose things for themselves. It's all just a matter of chance. You know, some input comes in, some input goes out. Maybe output goes out. Maybe the output that goes out is probabilistic. I think many of us, I mean, especially people that are sort of sympathetic to libertarian free will, would just naturally say, we haven't given those robots free will or agency. I think that's probably the natural thing to say on my picture, because they're missing something. They're missing like the agent bit of agency.
Yeah, thanks, Laura. So I wanted to draw a distinction between two different ways something might lack a particular objective probability and ask how your arguments extend to that distinction. So you might lack a particular objective probability because you have a sort of mushy or imprecise objective chance. So you can assign an interval, like 0.2 to 0.8 chance. Or you might not be able to assign an interval or a precise chance. So that's a more radical way to lack an objective probability.
Yeah.
And I worry that the same reasons for worrying about free will in the precise case extend to the imprecise case. So we have like mathematical models of imprecise things in terms of like non-measurable sets, and so it's like throwing a dart at a non-measurable set or something. And if you think, look, acting with a precise chance is just like acting with a coin. Acting with an imprecise chance is just like acting by throwing a dart at a imprecise range. And prima facie, it seems somewhat intuitive, like when we're weighing reasons, for example, it might be that, like suppose I have self-interested reasons to lie, but I also don't want to lie because I'm a moral person. Then you might think, look, the self-interested reasons create a sort of lower bound for the objective probability. That's, you know, the lower bound is 0.2, but then the reasons to be moral create an upper bound or something. So it might be that the reasons set a sort of range, but they don't set a precise thing. And so I wonder, is the case of imprecise chance equally problematic for free will? And how does that interact with the action stuff in terms of reasons?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, I think I agree that the case of imprecise chance is just as problematic for free will, because again, it's saying there is a chance, it's just that like it's fuzzy, or at least, I mean, it's possible that there are ways of understanding it that it doesn't create a problem, but like on the most natural ways of understanding it, it's sort of like still not up to you. One way of understanding is that like imprecise probability is that like there is a probability, we just don't know what it is, or there is a probability, it's just indeterminate what it is, and that's going to cause the same kinds of problems as there is a probability and it's determinate, and we know what it is. So yeah, so I also think, just as I think we shouldn't cash out these points about agency in terms of precise probability, we also shouldn't cash them out in terms of imprecise probability. But again, I think that if you take seriously the picture of agency on which it's sort of like me making the choice, so to speak, you're also not going to be inclined to cash these things out in terms of imprecise probabilities. And we can sort of think about, maybe you think like most people have some fuzziness, but like imagine an agent that just like totally knows her own mind, is able to like precisely identify the reasons. This agent still has to choose what the reasons are for her. And so then it's not going to sort of like making the agent fuzzy isn't going to like give us extra reason to endow her with probabilities.
Hi, thanks for the talk. I think there's a really quick response to objection 1.
Okay.
And that is that there's absolutely no reason to think that the normative structure of the reason to doing relation tracks or predicts the causal structure, the psychodynamic structure. I noticed that Schlosser has this little qualification: if Alice is rational on this occasion, then the causal influence of her reasons mirrors their normative strength. Yes, but we're talking about real agents, and real agents imperfectly are pretty far away from a rational norm. And I think this is true even if we're an internalist about reason, so I'm not relying on there being factors that make it rational for me that I don't acknowledge.
Good, yeah. I guess I agree with that objection to this as stated, but I wanted to try to, and so maybe in a sense this wasn't like the best quotation to use to support the point, but I think a charitable read of this, or maybe if you think this is like, or a reading that's like, or a point that's similar to this one, is worth taking seriously, which is that, look, action is like a matter of weighing the good things against the bad things. Maybe it's the good things as you see them. So maybe one way to think about, like, to sort of charitably read this is that Schlosser is thinking of normative strength as like normative strength according to me. So thinking like maybe thinking about the sort of the desires picture that was mentioned over here, and then what it is to be rational that he's talking about here is just to sort of like act on reasons. So it's something that you get trivially. I mean, I don't know. I guess I overall I agree with the point that, like, as stated, maybe this isn't a compelling picture anyway, but there is like a background, somewhat compelling picture, which is that, like, yeah, like more reasons to do something, higher chance I'll do it. Or that's how my motivations interact with what I do. We could use motivation instead of reasons, maybe, makes it more internal. You're shaking your head. Okay, so some mental state that like describes how much I like things, that sort of natural picture, like those mental states duke it out. The result of that duking it out is like some number that sort of like predicts what I'll do, so to speak. That's like, I mean, I don't know, maybe you can tell me if that picture is compelling, but I think it's sort of like a natural picture of agency, that like the things things that might incline me to do something duke it out against each other, and like what's left is what I'll do. And that none of that is sort of like coming from me, so to speak. So that's the picture I'm arguing against. I've tried to make the picture sound like a little more compelling, but I suppose if you think objection 1 is just like that objection, all the better for me. Yay.
I was going to ask you about 2 edge cases, but in the interest of time in the queue, I'll just pick one of them. A demon attaches a bomb to me that's guaranteed to blow me up tomorrow unless an infinitely fine dart hits a particular point on a continuous dartboard. The chance of the dart hitting that point is 0, so the chance of the bomb blowing me up tomorrow is 1. So the chance of me lying the next day is 0. What happens is the dart does hit the point, and I do my regular thing of lying on Saturday with my. It looks like a counterexample to the chance principle.
Okay. Yeah, that is an edge case. So I mean, I guess the sort of the overall question is like, what should we say when events of chance 0 happen? I guess I'm not sure. I'm not even sure the best description of the case is there's a chance 0 of that happening. I mean, I might be more inclined to say there's an infinitesimal chance or something like that. Yeah, I mean, I think if a chance 0 event happens, it will turn out that a lot of things that we thought were true are false. One of them will be this action wasn't, or yeah, so like this action that was previously not free becomes free because I exist so that I can perform it. I mean, I think there's, I mean, maybe we should just forget about the infinitesimal stuff. Well, maybe we can't. But anyway, so things can happen that switch an event from being not up to me to being up to me. You've just given an example, and that's no problem. You've just given an example in which that happens. It turns out that example, the probability, the chance of something switching from not being up to me to being up to me is 0. If we're happy to assign chance 0 to that, we should sort of also be happy to assign chance 0 to a lot of things that might happen. After all, they very well might happen. So then it's sort of not a problem that a thing that was up to me thing that was not up to me became up to me with chance 0, because, hey, that's the kind of thing that happens. On the other hand, if we think that if we want to assign infinitesimal chance to those events rather than 0, then we're going to say that, well, there's an infinitesimal chance that this will be up to me. In other words, there's like an infinitesimal chance that this thing has no chance whatsoever, whereas there's a 1 minus infinitesimal chance that this thing has chance 0. And then I guess we have to say how sort of like propositions that have chances and don't have chances can sort of like interact, so to speak. Yeah, so that's what I would say about that case. Thanks. You can tell me the other edge case later, and I'd be happy to hear it.
I wanted to take us back to your reply to objection 1.
Okay.
In which you say you can grant that the conditional probability that Alice tells the truth, given that her reasons weigh in favor of telling the truth, is greater than the conditional probability of her telling the truth, given that her reasons weigh against telling the truth. Mm-hmm. I was a little unclear as now what you're going to say in this. What you say in these cases that the antecedents just describe what it is to act freely, and mm-hmm. you've got this idea that runs through the paper that which, by the way, I like very much, that objective conditional probabilities don't threaten free will if the antecedents are just descriptions of free acts. or choices. So that's the where this fits in. But it seems to me, if we look at the Schlosser case, I mean, the terms in which he expresses it give us a clue to how we should interpret these antecedents. And he says, for example, suppose that Alice judges that the reasons for truth-telling greatly outweigh the normative strengths of the reasons for telling a lie. So I take it that that's what you had, what you were trying to convey in your on page 3 by saying Alice's reasons weigh in favor of telling the truth. And if that's fair, well, this makes this antecedent describes a judgment on Alice's part, and a judgment is just not a choice. I mean, phenomenologically, it's pretty clear to me that I frequently judge that my reasons for doing X outweigh my reasons for not doing it, and yet I still don't do it. I still don't choose to do it. So it's a judgment, and a lot of us are doxastic, involuntary people who think that our judgments and beliefs and the like are not under at least our direct control. So I don't see that. I just can't see any way of reading that the antecedent that Schlosser has in mind that makes it out to be a description of a free act. Or choice.
Good, yeah, thanks. Yeah, I mean, I think this might be just another vote in the camp of I kind of picked the wrong quote to explain what the strongest version of this objection is. In my reply, I actually want to deny that Schlosser correctly describes what's going on. I don't, so, and maybe to bring it directly to the Schlosser case, there are two ways you could interpret the normative strength of a reason. And one is sort of how much motivation I choose to let it give me. That's the one on which my reading makes sense. But then there's this other reading that's like how inclined the truly good person would be to do this thing. If that's how we interpret it, then like Luis, I don't think that the causal strength is going to have anything to do with the normative strength. Well, maybe it'll have something to do with the normative strength, because then the thing I'm picking is just how much will this reason motivate me. So I guess, yeah, so it's sort of like Schlosser's picture. If normative strength is interpreted as something that will genuinely motivate me, then it's got to be interpreted in this way where the antecedent is something that's up to me, because my motivation is, or my ultimate motivation, the thing that ultimately moves me, that is going to be up to me, at least in cases in which I'm free. Maybe there are some other cases like addiction where I'm just genuinely not free. If normative strength is interpreted in a way where there's no necessary link between what's normative and what motivates me, then this picture doesn't correctly describe what it is to act, because it's missing the bit where where something motivates me.
Lara, it's a really interesting issue. I'm wondering about two connected things. One is the notion of objective probability and the notion of free will are notoriously obscure notions. Why are you so certain that no action can both be free and have an objective probability? And connected to this is what puzzles me about this whole discussion is that really all the realist understandings of quantum mechanics assign objective probability, or something that plays the role of objective probability, to every motion of every particle or field in the universe. So unless you want to take free choice out of the motions of particles, I don't see how you're going to fit this, your kind of response in. You're kind of dependent on an old-fashioned way of understanding quantum mechanics and supporting your view, as you were aware of.
Oh, now I'm old-fashioned. Okay, great. Thank you for those, very helpful questions. So why am I so sure that these two, that objective probability and free will are incompatible with each other? Well, so the notion of objective probability is obscure, but we do know some things that must be true if things are to have a certain objective probability, and those things aren't obscure, like that sequences have to look like this if they issue from objective probability and things like that. I mean, the notion of free will, yeah, is obscure. I guess like what I'm trying to do in this paper is to argue that people that think about it in a certain way, I mean, so the fact that it's obscure doesn't mean we can't talk about it. I think there are pretty compelling arguments for the idea that it's incompatible with determinism. I think if you think it's incompatible with determinism, then for reasons that Peter has convinced me of, you should also think it's incompatible with objective probabilities. Obscure though that notion is, we do know what that means is relevantly like a coin flip or something like that. And so, the point of the paper is to argue, like, if we accept this one natural view of free will, namely that there have to be sort of things that are like genuinely open to me or genuinely possible, then we have a worry, and in response to that worry, hey, there actually is one way the universe could be that will vindicate the idea that I have free will. Now, maybe you can convince me of the sort of compatibilist view, but I haven't been convinced of that yet. So what I'm interested in is like, can the incompatibilist hope for free will? And then on the sort of like, so obviously, the physics better than I do. I mean, so all I was claiming in that paper is that like there are some understandings of quantum mechanics according to which the conditional probabilities are the fundamental things. I think so for me, whether we have free will is an empirical, so for me, whether we have free will is an empirical question. So I can't just say like, hey, no matter how physics turns out, or no matter what our best physical theory of the universe happens to be, that one's going to vindicate the idea that we have free will. I think even if you're a compatibilist, there are like plenty of pictures that, plenty of empirical pictures that will be incompatible with free will. For example, if it just turns out that like aliens are controlling our brains, that would give us not free will. So yeah, I mean, I guess what I'm arguing is just that here's an empirical picture that would vindicate free will, even if you're an incompatibilist in a pretty strong sense. And the science isn't yet settled about whether that's the correct picture. So we have reasons to sort of like hope that the correct picture turns out to be compatible with free will. So I mean, in a sense, it's maybe like somewhat weaker point than you would hope for. I mean, what you would hope for is like an argument that like, hey, no matter what science says in the future, free will all the way. I don't think that's right, because I think we could find out that we don't have free will. But yeah, I think the science in this area, both the correct physics and the sort of like how to think about the probabilities involved in that correct physics, which is a philosophical question, remain unsettled. And I agree that it's sort of like it's disappointing if like free will rests on just, physicists finding out that some particular thing is true. Nonetheless, I think that's the situation we're in. I think it would be disappointing to find out that determinism is true. I think we wouldn't be able to think of our lives as genuinely open in the way that we want to think of them as being genuinely open. And I think exact same point holds if what we find out is that our actions are governed by objective probabilities. But open to be convinced otherwise. Maybe during your talk you'll convince me of that. Thanks.